Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luer, and today we're going truly to the other side of the planet, all the way to Sao Paulo, Brazil, to welcome my good buddy, Frederico Pena. Welcome to the podcast, Fred.
Thank you, Marcus. It's a tremendous pleasure to be here and chat with you for some time this morning.
Definitely, and we know each other for a long time. I was even at your wedding in Belo Horizonte many years ago. We watched some football together. Actually, I think that was at the same time it was a World Cup qualification match between Argentina and Brazil in Brazil. It was amazing, of course, to see and witness that. And again, you are another one of those friends we have around the world where you've had an incredible career. You operate in a very exciting and interesting space. Brazil, of course, the country where really the football stars are being born every day. And you've been very heavily involved. So we're going to really dig deep into the world of football, soccer here. But you've also worked with a very unique agency, which, again, many people in our industry would know and would have at least heard of, anyone who ever dealt with football out of Brazil, which is Traffic. So we're going to cover all those things of your career, the things you've done on your own as an entrepreneur, and, of course, the roles you've played, as I said, with one of the biggest agencies in that part of the world there. So it's going to be a fun hour here. And as we always do, we start right at the beginning, a little bit about, coming out of Wharton School. And your first job was the Müller Sports Group, which obviously links also to a gentleman who was just recently on my podcast, Mr. Jeff Slack, who I believe was your first boss there. So how do you come out of Wharton and land the Müller Sports Group gig? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I grew up in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, and I moved to the United States to go to boarding school. And after boarding school, I went to Wharton undergrad, graduated in finance. So I was living in the U.S. for 6 years. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to come back to Brazil because obviously at that time, growing up in the 90s abroad, it's not like today, there's no internet.
Right.
So I was looking for a job, and graduating in finance, it was normal to try to go work for investment banks at the time. Right. But in 1996, which was my sophomore year of college, I watched a movie that changed my life. And that movie is Jerry Maguire.
I like that one too.
Yeah, so that was when I saw that from the opening scene, I said, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. Right. And I have to find a way to become a sports agent. And really my idea, living in the United States, and I've always been a great fan of NBA and NFL and the American sports and the way of Americans dealing with sports. I said, I have to try to take that to Brazil and do that with, our football, because we have the best football in the world, right? We're Brazilians.
Absolutely.
And at the time, Brazil was actually the World Cup winner, having just won the 1994 World Cup in Brazil, which was the first time since 1970. So, we had the best player in the world, Romario, at the time, and you could just living in the United States, seeing all the sports marketing, the endorsements,
winning it in the US. That's right. I was at the final. Damn, I was there watching it. I watched it.
Yeah, but it's a remarkable event. Exactly. I was 18 years old at the time, so you can imagine being 18 in Brazil winning the World Cup. So, from that point on. Throughout college, my objective was, how do I get into the sports marketing world? How do I become an agent? And, it's very difficult, again, because there's no internet. It's not like today you go to the company's website and the stories, and you go to, Wikipedia and you find out everything about everyone, right? Yep. So I actually worked for Bank Boston in Brazil for a couple of years as a summer intern. And I was hired by an investment bank called Garantia, which was the biggest investment bank of Brazil at the time. And it had just been acquired by Credit Suisse, First Boston. And about 2 months before my graduation, I went to an event in New York, which was a 2-day event for people who wanted to go into the world of sports. Oh. And one of the speakers at the event was Jeff Slack. All right. And he had been working for the Müller Sports Group at the time, which was a a small sports marketing agency in New York, owned by Roberto Mueller, who's someone, a veteran in the world of sports.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly, Uruguayan. And Jeff had a very fancy title, which I've made fun of him forever, which was, director of European super clubs, something like this, that's how he was introduced at the event. Now, This is an event for Americans, and obviously I'm not interested in working with American sports. I'm interested in working with soccer, which, very difficult at the time. And he was the only one at the event that had any connection with soccer. So after he spoke, I went over, introduced myself. He was very, he was very nice, and he took my CV, and I sent him an email, and I followed up with, I had one, recruiting trip to an investment bank in New York, and I stopped by to say hello. So he was very nice. And it just so happened that the Mueller Sports Group was involved with a private equity fund at the time called Hicks Muse Tate and First.
Right.
And this private equity fund was doing a big investment in Latin America, buying cable companies, setting up sports TV, Pan American Sports TV network, buying sports marketing agencies, and buying football clubs.
Yeah.
So, and the management affiliate of Hicks Muse was the Mueller Sports Group. And this was all happening at the same time. And then suddenly one day, I'm about to graduate and come back to Brazil and start working for a boring investment bank. And Jeff calls me up and says, "Can you come to New York? I want to talk to you about a project of ours." And I said, "Yes, absolutely." I was actually, this is funny, Mark. I was in Hawaii.
Oh, right. Okay.
The day he called me, because I had like a post-graduation trip to Hawaii set up. And I said, "Well, I'm in Hawaii right now, but I'll be back in Philadelphia in a couple of days, and I'll take the train up to New York, and we can talk." And that's how it all started. We talked, and obviously I had read up everything that was happening in Brazil, and I made the connections between what was going on and Hicks Muse and the Mueller Sports Group, and he just said, "Okay, you're hired," and I started working the following week. So it was all very sudden. I actually had to call the investment bank that I was going to work for and quit before I even started, which was funny. So I was very fortunate. It was the timing was just right, because if I had never gone to that event, then my life story would have been completely different.
Absolutely. And the part I like, again, just to add to it and give a little of a heads up already, of course, Jeff now is your partner in your current agency, as your chairman. So again, I love that, this is how you started and this is where you are now, 20 years later. So, but we'll come back to that, of course, later. Now, if we covered a little bit already with Jeff on PSN, but I'd love to hear just quickly your thoughts on it, because it was a fairly short-lived affair with him, right? I think you were with him less than a year. What happened there? Was it, did you leave before it all blew up, or it then blew up and then you moved on, or what happened there?
Yeah, so what happened I actually did not work with Jeff on the PSN project. In the beginning, what we did is we worked on our first job. Actually, obviously one of the companies that Hicks Muse was buying for this platform was Traffic Sports in Brazil.
Oh, they were looking to buy Traffic as well. Okay,
they did buy. They did buy.
Oh, they did buy actually.
They bought 49. They bought 49% of Traffic.
Right.
So
that's right.
That's how I end up at Traffic afterwards.
Yeah,
but so when I start with Jeff, we're still going through the due diligence of buying Traffic. So it was good because what I had to do is I actually had to review all the contracts of Traffic, either on the buy side and the sell side.
Yep.
So in about 2 months, I knew everything about the company and what they were doing and how much, how much they were paying for the rights, what was the revenue. So I had
at least
good
you thought you knew at that time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, right on. And then when we actually started, because then Hicks Muse bought Corinthians and Cruzeiro, which are two big clubs in Brazil. That was part of the platform. They were gonna buy more clubs, and then Globo in Brazil had the government changed the law to actually stop Hicks Muse and ISL at that time of buying all these clubs, because Globo was afraid of losing the TV rights for the Brazilian league. So we were, because we had Corinthians and Cruzeiro, Jeff and I, we were in charge of sponsorship sales. So we were traveling back and forth. We were actually 1 week in Brazil, 1 week in New York for about 3 months until we sold the shirt sponsorship of Corinthians to Pepsi, which was a great, which was a great deal. It was probably one of the best deals during this Hicks Muse time. And this is all in parallel. Hicks Muse was setting up PSN. I never got to work with PSN. Obviously, I knew everything that was going on, and a lot of the negotiations in the buying of rights of PSN had, traffic and torneos y competencias in Argentina involved. So I kind of heard about it, and I knew what was going on, but I wasn't working on that. I was working more closely with Jeff on the clubs, on the traffic due diligence. And then after about a little under a year, Mr. Hawila, who's the owner of Traffic, and he sold 49% to Hicks Muse, and he kept 51%. He had a controlling stake. He invited me to come work for Traffic, and I accepted. Jeff was going to PSN.com. I was more interested. We had just completed the sale of the sponsorship to Pepsi, which was a good. So it was a good, it was a feeling of we had a mission and we accomplished it. I was looking to move back to Brazil. Jeff understood it. Roberto Mueller understood it, and Mr. Hawila. I actually felt like a player who was being dealt, because before I could accept coming back to Brazil to come work for Traffic, Mr. Hawila had to speak with Roberto Mueller to make sure that Roberto Mueller was okay with me moving from the Mueller Sports Group to Traffic. So it was
that's a good. I like that. That's a really, you have a fairly big start into the industry here. This isn't just some small little stuff here. I love this. Now the part which is interesting, and I again, we're jumping a bit ahead as usual, but now if I remember, and this is sort of anecdotally, I met Mr. Havila as well. I remember when we were there and we were obviously doing business with you guys. There was some story about how he bought the agency back, from at the time then, where in between of that transaction he made a ton of money, right? I mean, it was something like $100 million because of he was sold it for 150 and he bought it back for 50 or something like that. I mean, what were the numbers exactly? Just roughly.
What happened was he sold 49% at the time, I think, for $125 million. Right. Plus an injection of capital in the company. Right. And then what happened was, it was actually the internet bubble burst in 2000. This deal was 1999. Right, so, right. And then the year after the internet bubble, there was the internet failure. And apparently Hicks Muse had a lot of bad internet assets. Okay. So it really hit them as a fund. And obviously, when you're doing everything, and it's such a big part, you imagine that you're buying, you're buying clubs, you're buying sports marketing agencies, you're setting up pan-regional TV channel from zero, and you have the cable operators. So I mean, it's a huge project, and you're doing this at a very quick pace. So obviously, there's a lot of mistakes are made, and I don't know the details, but because of what I understand is because of the internet problems, Hicks Muse just ran out of money, or they ran out of credibility to raise money, and they just said, okay, let's just get out of it. And when and obviously they kind of selected which assets they wanted to keep, and I think then they rolled everything up and they sold to Fox, because PSN kind of became Fox Sports in Latin America. Right. And part of that deal, Traffic had, when Traffic was bought, Traffic had a joint venture with Torneos y Competencias called TNT, which was Traffic and Torneos. Right. Correct. So, correct. And that company held very important rights, which were the TV rights for Copa Libertadores and at the time Copa Mercosul, which were let's say the tier 1 and tier 2 continental competitions in South America. So that was really the key asset that PSN needed for it to be worth something, for them to be sold to News Corporation, right? So in the deal, what Mr. Howilla did is he actually said, okay, I'll give up Traffic's 50% stake in the joint venture TNT, and you give me back the 49% of Traffic that will not have the 50% of TNT anymore. And he had a company also in the United States, which at the time was called Interforever Sports, and later on became Traffic Sports USA, but at the time Interforever. And he gave up Interforever as well. So he just he took a step back. He retook control of something that was smaller than what he once had, but he was $125 million richer because he had sold 49%. So
that's right.
No, he was a genius, Marcus. I mean, he was a great deal maker. And actually, the best move he had is he actually took the proceeds of that sale, and he bought TV networks in Brazil.
That's right.
Which
That's right.
Now are the big assets of his family, and it kind of changed their life. So he was very smart. He was thinking 5-6 moves ahead, and he did a great deal. But it was it wasn't something that he had planned. It was really because of the crisis in Hicks Mills that opportunity presented to himself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. I met him, obviously, a great gentleman, and definitely very clever. And fair enough, he saw the opportunity and he took it, which is great. So now let's dig a bit around, your role in Traffic there in the early days. So This is early 2000. Here we now. I think you were director of internet for a while, and then you moved into the TV space, right? So let's just talk us a bit through this, because around that time, and I don't know exactly the exact date, but it was in the early 2000s, we came across each other too. And obviously we did a deal where TSA, in this case, was representing the traffic rights in Asia. And I want to talk a bit about it in a minute, but first I want to hear a little bit more exactly what you were doing there at the early days, and then we'll have a little TSA story here in the middle.
Yeah, so what happened was when I first arrived at Traffic, this was before the internet bubble. So, I was young, and internet is something of the young people for the young people. So obviously I'm put in charge of internet. Because traffic, and it was a time in which when you had the media rights, internet was just in there, even though no one really understood what these rights were. Yep. So we created a website in Brazil called the NetGo. NetGo it was a database of football games and football players, and it had video clips of goals. Right. Okay. And it had an editorial line. So it was a big soccer, or football. Let's call it football because we're not in the United States.
Which was sort of the words we were using at that time.
It was a portal, and this was good because I'm working on this in Brazil, and Jeff is in charge of PSN.com. And actually, what happened was 3-4 months later, PSN makes an offer to Traffic to buy Net now. Right. And Howilla, the good negotiator he is, and the good poker player he is, refuses to sell because he's the kind of guy. If someone wants to buy, then you don't want to sell. So, which was the wrong decision at the time because after some months, it actually the whole thing blew up, and NetGo, we actually had to shut down NetGo as well because we just couldn't make any money off of it. We just realized this is not going anywhere. But I did that. Yeah, exactly. So I did that for about 6 months or a year, but it wasn't really. I could quickly see that wasn't going anywhere, and Mr. Howilla as well. So he said, "Well, I want to take the sales of TV rights in-house because at the time, what Traffic did is Traffic had a big umbrella deal with IMG." And IMG was in charge of selling the TV rights of Traffic all over the world. Globally. Not as an agency, but, they were commissioned, but they had a minimum guarantee.
Right, sure.
So they were the ones selling all the South American tournaments all over the world for Traffic. Right. All that Traffic did was sell in South America, which was, maybe 90% of the revenues at the time. And we saw there's more potential to bring in money from the rest of the world. And when we set that up, and we had a CEO at the time, Marcelo Millier, you obviously remember him.
Yes, absolutely, Marcelo.
And he said, okay, let's go piece by piece. So first we broke it off with IMG, and we said, okay, let's focus in Europe, because that's where there's going to be more interest.
The bigger money
because of the South American players go to Europe and they play there. So obviously there's a connection not only with Brazil but Argentina and Uruguay. And let's find solutions for the rest of the world. And I think that's when we met. We met at a Sportel, I think, and we hit it off. And we saw you as an agency who would really put their heart and hard work on developing these assets. I remember you had the great history with WWE, and we saw that as we need people like TSA and Marcus to really believe in the product and build it up. And that's when we did the partnership for the TV distribution in Asia, right?
Yeah. That's absolutely true. And the part which I wanted to add to it, which, is sort of the part which I have vividly in my mind is as great as an asset it was, let's call it in general, Latin American football or South American football didn't have the world's greatest reputation in our part of the world. And I can't comment on other parts of the world, but for sure, when we were talking to broadcaster, it was always a couple of things which came up, and you might remember that, these conversations. It was always the schedule always changes, the last minute, the signal doesn't show up, this gets dropped, that gets dropped. Yeah. And so we were, and this is us as a team, your traffic on your end and us on our side, I think we spent a lot of time just reaffirming broadcasters, this will be different. We are here to hold your hand. We're going to have people on the ground. We will monitor the satellite signals and all this stuff. And it was sort of, now you think of it as just basic, right? But I think that was really what it took at the time to somewhat also put a bit of our own reputation on the line. People knew us from WWE or others, which again is very different content, but and therefore different challenges with delivery. And that worked. At the end of the day, I think we all did some good business there, had some good deals in the region. Copa America, of course, was part of the big one. But it's an interesting example again of what a lot of times what it takes to, which everyone would think, it's a great product, but it had a reputational challenge, right? Do you remember that?
Yeah, and it was a great project for me personally because we had to kind of rebrand the whole thing, right? We were doing pre-match reports, post-match reports, and we were forcing the CONMEBOL, which is the South American Federation, to to try to schedule the games ahead of time, telling them how important it was to promote the game, abroad. Right. And we had the English audio guide, which we didn't have before, and the graphs on the matches with and a full, so providing the broadcasters and the commentators with what was going on. I mean, what is the context of this game? What are the who are these players? Who are these coaches? So preparing this, and I was the one. We obviously had very little budget for this, but it was something that fell on my shoulders, and I was very proud of it because I knew it was a long-term project, and I think you did a great job. We did a deal with Eurosports in Europe. That was it was little money, but we wanted to have it all over Europe so that people were more familiar with the South American football. And I think it paid off because even though I wasn't in this division anymore, but I saw, how much money traffic was bringing in from these international rights. And it all started back, and this is, I think, 2001 when we, started this from zero. Because before, what IMG was doing is IMG was basically packaging these rights with, a bunch of other stuff they had.
Yeah, correct.
And they were, assigning it a value that would, basically cover the minimum guarantee that they had agreed with traffic. They would put no efforts in developing the brand. They would, they wouldn't add anything to the TV production. I remember some broadcasters saying, okay, but which, where do I get where I'm going to get the feed, which satellite in South America? And I remember we even did the deal with one of those global satellite companies to have the feed everywhere in the world. So, it could be any,
there's a lot of work went into this.
Pay, right?
Absolutely.
They didn't have to pay for the signal. So it was a great job. And it was a fun time, and TSA worked very hard as well.
Yeah, and again, I think the part about selling it as an individual product, that is also, I think, like every agency, you do bundle things here and there, but we didn't have that much other footballs. For us, it was clearly a bit of a standalone product, which is the way we position it, and on the back of it, I think we were able really to drive the value up. I remember a couple of deals were nice and juicy ones there. So now from then, obviously, you moved on as well. You moved into the sort of commercial side, sponsorship side. And we ended up doing some more business there, which I want to talk about a bit now. So, after your TV world, you started to do work in sponsorship, and I think it was linked to the Copa America in 2004, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, remember the beginning of the story, Marcus. I want to be a sports agent, right? And right. I'm not getting close to being an agent here. Right. I'm working on sponsors, selling the Corinthians shirt deal, working on internet portal and TV rights and all, but I want to be more involved in the game. I want to be speaking with, football directors. I want to be dealing with players. This is where I want to get. So what happened there at the time was there was a change within traffic sports that Mr. Hawila had a right-hand man named Rui Brizola, who unfortunately passed away quite young. He had a sudden stroke and he passed away. And hired to replace him was a former president of Flamengo, which is the biggest club in Brazil, Mr. Kleber Leite, who is a veteran in the Brazilian sports marketing industry as well. But what happened was he had his own company, and when he became the president of Flamengo, he had to basically give up his sports marketing company to be the club's president. So when his time left, he was invited by Mr. Hawila, and he became the commercial vice president in charge of all sponsorship sales. Right. So I saw that move. He was someone who was very connected to the game and and to sports decision, and I said, well, I want to work for that guy because I think that guy is going to give me the relationships to end up where I want to be.
Right. So makes sense.
And then again, you hear this all the time, and this is a business in which the key is personal relationships, right? So I step out of TV rights sales, and my job was finished as well, and I started working in sponsorship sales. So that was my first move, and we actually set up a part of a new division in the company, which was to bring sponsorship opportunities for football players, for Brazilian football players. And this was because Mr. Kleber Leite had so many connections with Brazilian agents that he said, well, this is going to be easy because the agents don't do any of this. Right. We'll just bring them in. We'll just tell them, look, we want to represent your client just for sponsorship deal. This is not this is not competition to you. Would you like this to happen? And obviously all the agents were happy because they said, this is one part that we don't do. We don't provide our clients with the service. It's going to be additional revenue if anything comes on. And we were very fortunate because one of the first deals we did was with Ronaldo. And this is already 2002. So Brazil is again world champion. Yeah. And Ronaldo was the best player in the world, and he had just been the top scorer in the World Cup, and he had scored 2 goals against your beloved Germany in the final. So this is suddenly me representing the best player in the world for sponsorship rights. Now I'm not his agent yet, but I'm getting pretty close. So that was the switch. And I remember, and we worked with TSA as well in trying to get Ronaldo sponsorship. You probably remember this. We did a big trip in Asia, and we met in Kuala Lumpur at the time, and we visited some clients with TSA. And in the meantime, it was not only working with Ronaldo, but also for the tournament. So getting sponsors for Copa America and the World Cup qualifiers. So it was a good feeling because we were selling important stuff. More important than the TV rights, I think, was the sponsorship rights for these properties.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Now, I just realized you should have me every time Brazil is in a World Cup final. I should be in the stadium because the two I
Exactly.
was there, because I was
We'll
there
pay
in
for you.
2002 as well. You both won.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm just glad I left Brazil when at the last World Cup right in time. I was there for the quarterfinal and I left
And then
before
you
the
left.
semifinal started.
Oh, that's okay.
So now we know where it all went down, down the toilet
Exactly.
there,
No. Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
won't go there.
Good
But
story. Good story.
it is a good story. Now, but coming back to the more serious side of it here, and that is obviously how we work together on the Copa America and then bringing LG Electronics into it, which was the first time for I think a big Korean firm to get involved.
Yeah.
Again, similar to the story earlier, we spent a lot of time working together and massaging both sides of it, right, to get a deal done. So you remember that part as well, right?
Yeah, that was a great deal. I'm very proud of it. It's one of the highlights. I've told you before, one of the highlights of my career. And it started, we brought in LG Electronics for the 2004 Copa America, which was going to be played in Peru.
That's right.
And from there, I think they renewed that deal a couple of times, and they became big sponsors because they signed up for the World Cup qualifiers as well, which was a big package. Because then you had, like a league format, all 10 countries of South America playing each other home and away. So that was 18 match dates, and they signed up for that. And I think the pre-Olympic tournament that was played in Chile as well. So it was a big relationship. Those guys were great guys. I mean, they had a great vision. And it was awesome. It was really
it was interesting. Again, it was I think the first time really for LG to take on football at that level. Obviously Samsung and others who were already in football or in the Olympics, but LG hadn't really. We're not that heavily involved yet. So it was a good one there. And again, I remember Peru is where that's where the host country was, and that's not an easy market in the first place. Again, right? It was a lot of we were dealing with LG in Peru as well, or you probably were dealing with them, and we were dealing, of course, with the guys in Korea. And again, that's the learning of it is that it's always a tag team approach, right? You really need to get the regional, or it's called global guys excited and seeing the big picture, because some of the budget would come from there. And then, of course, you need the local guy as well to go, I like this, I want this, right? It will be good for us too. And I think that was, again, the tag team approach here, right?
Yeah, and you become very proud when you go into a store and you see an LG TV with the highlights of Copa America, because they're they're really pushing the property there, like the asset. They're making it bigger, and they were very professional. They had a lot of knowledge. I mean, what you guys brought to the table, and then Hyundai signed right after that, because I think LG signing kind of gave us the credibility to get Hyundai as well, and so it was a great experience. I remember one very funny story in the draw for the Copa America, which was in Lima. And Lima has a microclimate situation, which it very rarely rains in Lima. And the setting for the draw was outdoors. And I remember these guys from LG, these like 3 Korean guys, asking me, what if it rains? And we're saying, well, don't worry, it's not going to rain. And they're saying, okay, but what if it rains? And we went over this about 5 times. Well, it's not going to rain. Well, what if it rains? Well, it's not going to rain. And these are, fun stories, and this is the kind of, you see the professionalism coming from them, and this was kind of eye-opening to us on how to treat sponsors, what kind of work we have to do around it, and this really started us. We did a sponsorship summit in Miami before, so we were this was a time which was very innovative at Traffic, and I was, in charge of it, and it was a very fun time, and it was a successful time, and you were part of this. So thank you for that, Marcus.
A lot of fun stories there to share here.
Yeah.
Now, I want to move on and a bit into now, very shortly after that, you then left and you started your own agency, right? Fabrica Sports Agency. What was the trigger point? Because it obviously then finally got to where you wanted to be, right? You became a player agent, a FIFA player agent, So what was what triggered the jump and just the transition there?
Yeah, so there's a cycle in football, right? You all think in 4-year terms because of the World Cup. So 2004 was the Copa America, and 2004 was the pre-Olympic tournament as well. In 2005, the World Cup qualifiers for 2006 wrapped up. So by the end of 2005, I had, because we had set up a new division at the time called Traffic Talentos, which was, we were dealing with, Ronaldo, and then we had signed up Robinho, we had signed up Luis Fabiano, who was, a striker for São Paulo, who later played for Sevilla. We signed up Carlos Alberto Pereira, which was the manager of the Brazil national team. So we had all these assets, and I had already the connections with all these guys. I felt, okay, I am 29 years old. I have no children. This is the time for me to, fulfill my dream and do what I want to do. This is the time to take the risk. I had obviously gone to Mr. Hawila. I had drawn up a big business plan to try to make Traffic go into sport, player representation. And he looked at it. He was very nice. And he said, well, it's really well done, but I don't want to do it. He said, and you have to remember, he was a sports journalist. So he had started, commentating, standing up behind the goalposts. So he had dealt with interviewing, and he had dealt in traveling with teams and being in relationship with players. And he said, look, I just don't, it's not my thing. I don't want to do it. I don't think it's something that Traffic as a company should do. And I just realized, well, if this is what I want to do and he doesn't want to do it, then I'm going to have to go out on my own. And it was a tough decision. And I had a conversation with him. I was shaking for like 2 days before I had the courage to go speak with him and tell him that I was going to quit. And, as always, he was really nice and supportive. And he said, well, you know what? I think he was an entrepreneur himself, so he understood it. And he said, if this is your dream, if this is what you want to do, you should go out and try it and know that, the doors here are going to be open for you. If it doesn't work out, then you just give me a call and you'll come back. And this was very nice of him. At the time, you never know if it's true. And later on, I did realize with, all the relationship between me, him, his son, Stefano, and, his entire family, I could see that he really meant what he was saying. But it was reassuring because you kind of go and you can be more fearless because you have a backup plan. You have a parachute, right? If it doesn't work, then I know I have something else I can do. So
it is a big decision. Now let's talk a bit about it. What you then did during those sort of 2 years, because interesting enough, and we can give a little heads up already. You then sold the company back to Traffic and ended up back in Traffic, right? But before we get there and then talk about your second round with Traffic, let's tell us a bit about then being on your own and now having to write your own checks rather than getting it every month. Let's talk about that, your entrepreneurial part to it.
Yeah. No, it was very difficult. There were times when I felt that I might have, taken too big of a step too soon. But I was very fortunate because, my parents supported me, and obviously having, parents who are able to support you, not only in terms of motivation, but also financially is an asset. And sometimes you have to use that in life as well. Right. So it was difficult. And I went, it took me 15 months to do my first deal. Oh, wow. So we're talking about, spending probably my life savings on, and I actually moved from São Paulo to Rio in the time because I realized it was so difficult in the beginning that I said, well, maybe I go to Rio. It sounded like an easier market. And then again, it's all about personal relationships. What happened was Kleber Leite, who had been my boss in Traffic on the sponsorship side, he became the vice president of Flamengo. So Flamengo went into a big crisis. He had been the president, and the new president called him up and said, look, you have to come to save us from relegation. And he took that spot as the vice president in charge of football decisions. And that was my first deal. Because I had worked with him for a long time.
Which player did you trade?
But it was a small player. His name is Clayton. So this is the thing that there's some deals in Brazil. They're very relevant in Brazil, but outside of Brazil, these players sometimes are not very well known. But it was a big relief, and it's actually the invoice 0001 of my company was to Flamengo in a deal that I did with Kleber, who had been my boss. But this was a player, I mean, he didn't do it because of me. This was a player a lot of clubs wanted in Brazil at the time. And then right afterwards, in the same transfer window, I did 2 players to Cruzeiro, which is a club in my hometown in Belo Horizonte, which was one of the clubs that Hicks Muse had invested in. So also with a president who I had known since, 7 years back because of that relationship between him and Hicks Muse. So then, and that's when you see, because a lot of people hear this, the Keys personal relationship, and this is bullshit, but it's not.
It is.
It really is. It really is, because it's the world of sports. There has to be a lot of trust involved, and this is why you need the right partners. You have to know the right people, and sometimes you do have to strike regional deals, regional representations, like Traffic did with TSA, and like TSA has done with so many properties such as WWE. Because if you're not there, if you don't have the relationship with those people, you're not going to be able to do a deal just because you have a nice PowerPoint presentation and sending emails and making conference calls. It's just not going to happen. You just have to sit down, look the people in the eye. They have to know you. They have to know that you're going to deliver. They have to know they're doing a good deal. They have to feel like they're doing a good deal, right?
Yeah.
So
no, totally, and yeah, exactly. And our industry, as big as it is a small industry as well, right? I mean, everyone kind of at a senior level, you do know each other or know of each other, at least in some sense, and therefore having those relationships and, of course, having a good reputation is always a very important key to the puzzle here. Now, before we then come back into obviously the Traffic part here, you did a couple of then I think after, I guess, you did your first few deals there in Brazil. You did do a few deals with Europe, right? I think
exactly.
Seen on your CV with everything from Moscow clubs to others. So talk a bit about that, because it's again, it's exciting all of a sudden to take a player from your hometown or home country overseas, right?
Yeah. So this is you're again, my inspiration was Jerry Maguire and was American sports. And you look at, how it works representing players in the US and the draft system and all that. And you go into football in Brazil, it's completely different.
Yeah.
It's completely different because you're signing up these players when they're very young. You have very little leverage when negotiating their first contract because they're basically unknown teenagers, right? And it's such a fragmented market. It's you're never really sure who's going to be the next big star, and so it's very difficult. And what I had to do, and obviously this is why my personal relationships were important in the beginning, because I was doing deals in Brazil which were not deals that you remember the name of the players in the future, but this was bringing in the cash for me to keep going and to invest in recruiting the young players who are the ones who will transfer to Europe, that's kind of the dynamic in Brazil. So, it took a little longer, but we were, I was then again very lucky because I had signed a young striker from Atlético Mineiro, which is actually the club I'm a fan of and is the rival of Cruzeiro. And this player started very young. Actually, in his debut, he scored. He scored, I think, 2 goals in his first 3 matches for the first team. And Atlético Mineiro was in a very bad financial situation, which is also very common in Brazilian football. And he was immediately sold to a small club in Holland called Heerenveen, which was a club I had never heard of before. Yeah. And so that was my first international deal. And then right afterwards, I had a client who I was able to sign, and he was actually already playing in Europe. He was playing in the Ukraine, and he was transferred from the Ukraine to Russia. And I was able to sit down with him when he was on vacation in Brazil, and explain to him what my background was, and it's very difficult when you're starting out, Marcus, because you kind of have to sell yourself. And you have to exaggerate, not lie, but you have to exaggerate some things that you're able to do. And so I'm very thankful to these players in the beginning because they believed in me, they trusted me, and, thankfully I was able to deliver as well because, you never know. And this is a part of the business, and it's a business with low barriers of entry. And if someone is a good salesman, they can convince a player that they're going to be able to do great things, and then they don't deliver, and it's sad because it's the career of a professional athlete, which has a lot of people
Absolutely.
behind him who depend on him. Because
Absolutely.
these players in Brazil, they come from very humble, economic
Backgrounds.
backgrounds. So, but
Now, look,
it was tough.
I'm a
It was
huge
tough.
fan of Jerry Maguire, the movie as well. And the two favorite lines, and I'm just wondering whether your clients ever told them, they ask you that as well, is of course, "Show me the money," right? Which is just an amazing, awesome scene there. And of course, and actually the other one is always the one where he goes, "Help me help you."
That's
right?
that's
in,
the one.
we
That's the
both
one.
have to work together, right? It isn't just the agent making magic; it's the player has to do his part too. How much of those part of it, is show me the money, of course, which every player would want you to do. And then, of course, have the player also work with you. How much you saw that already at that time? And, of course, now where you've been doing a lot more in this space already.
Well, I think that's the thing. Show me the money is what the player tells you, and help me help you is what you tell the players back, right? If you want me to show you the money, then you have to help me help you. So these are definitely some of the best quotes, and they have guided my professional life. But so coming back to what really happens is the beginnings of the players in Brazil, they're not that, it's not normal that a player will have this kind of attitude, especially in the beginning. I mean, later on, they will, because they have proved themselves. But in the beginning, again, it's such a difficult, I mean, you're talking about, we think about, when we went to school and when we were young at high school or at college, you think about, how difficult it is to become a medical doctor, a brain surgeon. I mean, these players, what they go through to become world-class players is unbelievable. I mean, the competition for it is huge. And, it was before people thought, oh, well, it's all about the talent, right? It's either you have it or you don't have it. And definitely, as you're living it, you can see it's not the talent. I mean, I've seen, many dozens of great, talented athletes that have gone nowhere because it takes a lot of inner strength and discipline. I mean, the work ethic, and you have to remember, I mean, where these kids are coming from and what they go through. I mean, moving away from home at a very young age, and where they go to live. I mean, they're not going to a boarding school in Connecticut, United States. I mean, they're going to these football facilities, which, they're getting better. And it's, I don't want to mean that it's like that's like a prison, but it's tough. You're talking about, four kids bunkering in a room, and it's difficult, and it's very difficult for them, and for us to do our job.
And when they go overseas as well, right? I mean, they don't always land at Barcelona or Madrid right away, right? They're landed also the places where similar. Again, you are in a small little town in Germany, in Holland, and Belgium, or wherever it maybe is in the world. Or even more exotic locations where someone might have to start. They land here in Asia, some Brazilian players, and that's tough, right? You're far away from home, totally different language, different food, and you name it. So no, I do appreciate that, and I'd love to it's just on its own is such a great topic, and maybe we'll touch on it a bit later again. But I just wanted to sort of now get into the point where you're as I said, you've been running your agency now for a couple of years here. And all of a sudden, you're getting back into, or traffic buys you. Again, what was the trigger point? Was it all of a sudden Havila saying, hey, you know what, Fred, I think you better come back here and let me buy you? Or what was, the trigger here?
Yeah, so what happened was after I left, Traffic had set up a football club in the United States, in Miami. Because Traffic had bought back Inter Forever Sports from Hicks Muse, had rebranded it Traffic Sports USA, and they were again running sports marketing, especially buying from CONCACAF the rights for, the CONCACAF tournaments and the World Cup qualifiers in Central America and the Caribbean. So they had a CEO there at the time, and he wanted to go into football players, but he was what he was looking at was TPO, third party ownership.
Right.
He thought this was a great market. This is where because Traffic was a Brazilian company, it could have a big advantage. And he thought, okay, this is a world in which, revenues are just going up and up and up. And this revenue eventually goes down to the clubs. And the clubs have nowhere else to spend after they set up, obviously, their infrastructure. But they would just spend it on wages and on transfers. Yep. Because, once you build a first-class training ground, then what else is there to do? You just buy players, right? You go, that's where the money goes. That's the flow of money. So I said, well, we're in Brazil. We should take advantage of that. So, and he had a different vision. Also, he thought, football in the United States was going to develop much faster than it did, but it's reaching what he imagined. But maybe traffic was too early in the involvement and in the money that invested in the United States. Right. But anyhow, so Traffic started with a club in Miami, which was Miami FC, that actually signed up Romario to go play in the United States. Once best player in the world, and a couple other players. Zinho, who was part of the 1994 World Cup squad, also went to play there, and it was a Brazilian manager. And Traffic also set up a youth academy in São Paulo. To develop players, to be sold.
That's Ricardo da Silva's club now, right? Is that correct?
It is. Ricardo da Silva is actually a deal brokered by Jeff Slack.
That's right.
So Ricardo da Silva buys it from Traffic, and Jeff was in that deal. And Aaron Davidson, who worked with us in the Miller Sports Group as well, was in charge of Miami. So that was, there was people, it was all... people who knew each other for a long time doing that too. But anyway.
So let's come back to exactly how you get back into the Traffic fold here.
So they had a youth academy, and and then Traffic sets up a player fund, because once you have a youth academy, you have a club who's registered in the federation, so you can actually hold the rights for the players. And then what Traffic started doing was they would buy a player from Club A, register this player in Traffic's own club, and then loan him to a first division club where the player would play and showcase his skills. And then after 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, this player would be sold to Europe, and Traffic would make the profit in the between the buying and the selling, and the club that had the player on loan would have a percentage of the profit. That was the business model. And then
that's the third party ownership model, really, right? In a nutshell.
Exactly. Right. Which now is not allowed anymore. So, but this was back then. So back then it was allowed, and Traffic was the biggest player in Brazil doing this. So
got it.
How it started was they started asking me for advice. So I actually signed up as a consultant to. Are they doing the right? Are they getting the better end of the deals? Because they obviously they had the network and they had the money, but it was a new world for Traffic. Traffic as a company, they were very successful in buying and selling TV rights and sponsorship rights and other things, but never football players. So they signed me up as a consultant, and at the time I had already done. I was doing well and I was growing, so I had my own office in Rio, and Traffic did not have an office in Rio. So also Traffic was interested in, okay, so you sign up as a consultant, and, our people can use your office in Rio when they go to Rio for some deals. And that's how it started. And because of the personal connection that I had with not only Mr. Hawila, but also, Stefano, who's been a dear friend for over 20 years, and all of his family, there was a lot of trust. And he invited me to go back to Traffic first as an executive. He said, well, why don't you, come back? And I said, well, I can't go back because I have a company and I had a partner at the time. And I said, well, and I have my partner. And so I can't really leave. I'm not going to give him, my 50%. It's, it'd be unfair. We're doing this together. I had been doing it for, about 2.5 years at the time. And I said, but what you can do is you can buy my company. So it was actually, I was the one who gave them the idea. Said, well, look, we'll sell you a controlling stake. Obviously, I spoke with my partner before. We'll sell you a controlling stake, and we'll keep on as minority partners, and we'll run the business. And obviously, part of it is the consulting will be for free, right? Because we're part of the We're part of the traffic group.
The company, right?
Yeah. So that's how it.
That's how it all.
That's how it happened. So they actually bought, and it was great for us. It was great for our company. So, and then we rebranded the company Traffic Talentos, which had been, 4 or 5 years before that, the division for trying to bring sponsors to the players. So it all kind of connected, and it made sense. And so we were a separate company because we had a separate ownership structure, but we were within the group, and we started being the brokers for all the players that Traffic would buy and that Traffic would sell. And that obviously became a much bigger business than representing the players, because we had so much stock of players to sell that we had actually to stop signing players to represent them because we didn't have time to represent the players, because we were busy, traveling all over Europe and all over Brazil, buying and selling these players. And this was great because it gave, me a huge track record and relationship with, all the Brazilian clubs, obviously, all the clubs abroad, agents abroad, Brazilian agents. So and because Traffic was the biggest buyer, biggest seller, suddenly I go from being, a small agent who's, up and coming, but small, and then suddenly you become, a big time, a big boy in the market, in which, people are lining up to coming to see you, and they're whining and dining you. So it was a good experience, and it made sense for everyone, because Traffic they saved a lot of money because when we were buying the players, we were able to save the money, and we were able to sell these players to big clubs. I mean, we did deals with Barcelona, Liverpool, Hoffenheim. I mean, you name it, which all the leagues in Europe, abroad, China, Japan, Guangzhou Evergrande, who's become the biggest club in Asia. We did a deal with them. They were still in second division. They were still in the second league in China. We did a deal with them.
I know, obviously, this is sort of, literally the last almost, let's say, until recently, 2019, you were there, the CEO of the football division. So this was already during the time when China went completely crazy, right, for a few years here, where they bought everything which could move. Do you guys have any one of the big deals there, which you could talk about?
We did Dario Conca, which was the Argentinian who played for Fluminense.
Okay.
And he was sold to Guangzhou, and we had a percentage of his transfer rights at Fluminense. And we brokered that deal together with, there's one agent in Brazil who was really the biggest agent for the Chinese market. His name's Joseph Lee. And so, Joseph Lee had the buyer, and obviously we controlled the seller, Fluminense, and we did that deal. And that was the time when Conca went over to China, and his salary was the biggest salary in the world at the time, was $12 million. It was $1 million net per month. And this was more than Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo at the time.
Crazy. Yeah, I mean, you were much closer to this than I was, but of course we were following it. And funny enough, you always think, God, that's the time to get into it. And we sort of actually stuck our nose a bit in it. We never got anywhere with it, but it is it's a fascinating space. Obviously, it's all completely dried up, and it's going the other way, and unfortunately, very much the wrong way right now in Chinese football. There, unfortunately. But that's interesting. Now, what I wanted to talk a bit about, and obviously it's easy to see now what you're doing there, and how that leads to what we're talking about later, what you're doing with your own agency again. But before we leave Traffic, I do want to touch a little bit on what happened, right? And again, anyone in the industry has been long enough around and or follows FIFA football and of course what happened there in South America would know what I'm referring to here, and that is unfortunately how Traffic then got very much into a scandal and sucked into a whole bunch of bad things, and as much as you weren't directly involved in it, but obviously you were, on the sideline of this, watching it, I guess, in some degree. And I'd love to hear a little bit, on your, what you can share on that, because it's just such a crazy story. And as usual, a lot of it has been written about, but it's always good to hear really what happened inside.
Yeah. So it was very strange living it, because obviously looking in retrospect, you can see a lot of strange things were happening. But as you said, because all of this had nothing to do with the part of the business that I was running. I was, sometimes I just said, you just go, I have so much on my plate right now. I just have to get this deal done. And you're just doing what you have to do, right? Until something official hits. And I mean, internally for us, it was very strange because it was 2013. Mr. Hawila there were news that he had bought an apartment in Miami. And he was going there on a vacation. He was going to visit the apartment that he bought, and he didn't return. Now, and in the beginning, kind of no one knew about it, and except for his family, because obviously when you do a deal with the U.S. Department of Justice, you can imagine how serious that is. So really, no one can know, and that was I don't even know if all his family members knew, or maybe only Stefano at the time and his attorney. But it was strange, and you could feel that something was off. Now, much easier now knowing that actually something happened, right? I mean, sometimes in your life, some stuff happens and you think, well, that's strange. And then, the next day you see there was nothing strange about it and you don't think about it anymore, right? But then when something happens, you think, well, I should have realized what was going on. Not that I had, not that I could do anything about it, but it was just, it was strange. And the official story was he had depression and he was afraid of getting on the plane to come back to Brazil. And he just, and it was strange because he wasn't there. You couldn't speak with him. Then again, at this time already, Stefano was kind of running the football part of it, as he was kind of becoming the CEO of the company. So I didn't have it wasn't normal for me to have business meetings or, have to report stuff to Mr. Hawila. So, I mean, I'd obviously see him in the offices every day and go out to lunch when he was around and all this, but, he just wasn't there. So we didn't have a custom of reporting once a week or once a month or anything. We just would speak with Stefano, and I was running the show. I mean, I really had a lot of freedom in doing what I had to do. So, and just time went on and on and on, and the depression kind of became, it's retirement and it's this and that. And then I think after the World Cup is when people started gossiping about. So it took over a year for you to actually hear a version of something that might have happened. We were basically in the dark and really focused on day-to-day work during this time. And then
refresh my memory then, what was the sort of outcome and which then also really unraveled part of the company, right? Just talk us through that to refresh everyone's memory.
Yeah, so the company was set up in a structure in which all the acquisitions of these relationships with the federations were run by Mr. Hawila himself. So he did not involve other people in the company. And what we had was a TV sales department, which was later on run by Johann Lusch, your compatriot, German. And there was a sponsorship sales division. And then there was the football division, which I was running, which was separate because it had nothing to do with these events anymore. I mean, I had worked with them. I understood them. I would go just because, there were players there from the national team and there was some networking to do. So I would go, but as a guest of the company, I had free access to everywhere, but I wasn't in the selling, in the managing, I wasn't participating in the day-to-day. So really nothing changed because because he was in charge of the buying alone. I mean, these events kept happening and the sales kept going on. And no one really knew what happened until that day in Zurich, in which a lot of the presidents of federations were arrested, and there was a big scandal. And then the news came out. There was a press conference, and in the press conference, obviously, then it was revealed that Mr. Hawila was a witness cooperating with the U.S. Department of Justice. So that's when it was surprising, and I was traveling that day. So it was funny because I was about to get on a plane to go to Rio, and I just downloaded there was a PDF of the indictment, and I was able to download the PDF of the indictment before my flight. And I spent probably the next not only the next hour flying to Rio, but the next, 24 to 48 hours reading all about it. And, obviously knowing a lot of the people who were mentioned in the indictment, but not, being really knowledgeable about, how those things really worked, because I was always on the sell side of, when I was working with TV and I was working with sponsorship. It's like, okay, now we have this property, go out and sell it, like go out and develop it. I wasn't part of, going to the federation. And, I did go to Asuncion, Paraguay many times, but it was exactly because I was on the selling side, take the sponsors there, sit down with the people, but
cutting the deals on the back end of it.
Exactly. Right? Not cutting the deals, and thankfully, right? Because
absolutely. I mean, again, it's obviously a lot of it has been written about it, and it's blown up, and we can probably do another entire podcast on it. But keeping a bit of track of our time here, we won't go into detail of it. But never, as I said, anyone who hasn't read about it or seen about it, you should Google it. It's obviously an amazing story, in many ways, of what happened there, and therefore of how really it shook up the whole world of South American football and football in many other parts of the world, including all the way to FIFA.
But I'll tell you what saddens me about it is I think Mr. Hawila is they see him as a villain, in which, in my mind, he's really a victim of what happened. Now you can say, well, he's a victim that profited from all this, but then you have to go back and question something, and you can actually read the indictment, and you read the story that is corroborated by everyone. This is not something that it didn't start that way. I mean, it's someone who was doing business the right, proper way, and then he's kind of, he's put in a room and you say, okay, now you either do it this way or we're not doing this with you anymore. We're going with someone else. Right. And then when you think about who were the someone else's, you can see, okay, this is an industry-wide way of doing business. Mm-hmm. It's not, something that is done only in South and Central America. This is something that, and you've seen the stories, I mean, all over the world. I mean, you just see the story about Beckenbauer, right?
Yeah,
the World Cup, and all of them, and even
the other ripples going around the world.
Yeah, and the ISL scandal, and and you think about ISL as the they're great people, they're very competent. Oh wow, it's unbelievable what they did, and they were involved in a scandal as well. Now here I feel that unfairly there's another part of it in which they're not seeing everything that was good that traffic did for the development of football. They just, they're focusing on the wrong part of it, which is, now I understand how he got the rights, right? Yeah. But you have to understand that the bids happened anyway. I mean, he was competing with IMG for these bids. He was competing with Sport 5. He was competing. So all these guys are competing on the bid. It was just a question that the bid was done. Then there was a question of, where are the payments going? That's after the bid. It's not before the bid. So, and it actually, when you think about it, you can see that part of what happened is the effect, because in 2011, CONMEBOL took away the rights from Traffic after the 2011 Copa America in Argentina. And Traffic sued CONMEBOL in Miami because the jurisdiction was U.S. And, again, I don't know the details, but, you can kind of think, okay, so that kind of started the whole process, right? Because if there's a lawsuit, then you start having information in the United States. So, they took it away from Traffic because obviously, Traffic was not, this villain that people like to think that it was. And, this was happening everywhere. It was happening in Asia. It was happening in Europe. And what saddens me is I see a lot of people and a lot of, former colleagues of mine who, they kind of tried to erase Traffic from their CV. And look, it makes no sense because you were there. You knew what was happening. You knew it wasn't like some people, want to think that it is. And there's, there was a series on Amazon Prime that had a wrong depiction of Mr. Howell as well. So, it's very sad. Yeah.
Now, so Traffic is now, as from a sporting point of view, is completely gone, is it? Or is there still something left?
Traffic. So what happened was Traffic did not exist. What happened was after 2015, so part of the deal with the U.S. Department of Justice was that Mr. Hawila had to get out of, his business of sports marketing. And the proceeds of these sales were to go, there was a deal that he broke. So there was a fine that he had to pay. And obviously the proceeds of everything that he sold had to go as part of this fine. Now, I don't know the details because, again, it wasn't my part of the business, and then it reaches a point in which you don't really want to get involved as well. I mean, if you're not asked to be involved, you say, okay, let me just, is my business continuing as normal? No, your business is continuing as normal. So a lot of the pressure was on the rights. So Traffic had to give up the rights, had to sell the rights.
Trading business.
But obviously, as a consequence of this and everything that had happened, he started, or his family started selling all the sports rights. And we sold the club in Brazil, which, had started as a youth academy back in 2006. Sold it to actually a Chinese company who bought it, here because they wanted to have a grassroots program in Brazil. Right. The team in the US was sold. But by that time, Traffic did not have only Miami FC, but Miami FC had turned into Fort Lauderdale Strikers, and Traffic was a big shareholder in the USL. So Traffic and controlled other clubs in the US. So Traffic sold all of that and got out of that. And then the last asset that was sold was Estoril, because part of the platform back there, we didn't have time to speak about it, was a club in Portugal that Traffic had purchased, which was Estoril Praia, in the great town of Estoril, right outside Lisbon, where the Formula One track used to be. So it's well known to a lot of Brazilians because Ayrton Senna used to race very well there. And we had bought that club, and it was extremely successful because we took it from second division to first division and to play European competition. And it was used as a platform for a lot of great players who today play for big clubs in Europe and who play for the Brazil national team, who first went to Europe to play in Estoril, and then from Estoril went on to bigger clubs. So that was sold. And then in 2018, Mr. Hawila passed away. So he was finally able to, it's a very romantic story in a way. So he was, after some years in the United States, he was finally, everything was settled and he was allowed to come back to Brazil. He actually, he went to his daughter's wedding. He actually walked her down the aisle. He was already very sick because he had cancer and he had some heart diseases at the time, right? So he was in poor health, but he was able to move back to Brazil. He was able to walk his daughter down the aisle before he passed away. So it was good because he was finally reunited with, obviously he was with his family, all the time because they were going to the United States, but he was not. He was living there for many years. Right. And he was finally able to come back, passed away. And that's when really I sat down with Stefano and said, look, this is a business who was my business to begin with. It was something that, your father didn't even want to do 10 years ago. And it was part of a bigger platform. Now this bigger platform doesn't exist anymore. We had just sold Estoril to American investors. So I think it's time for me to buy you out of the business. Right. And I put together my 4 main agents who all have worked with me and the company for over 10 years. And we actually did a management buyout of TFM Agency because then, we had rebranded to TFM Agency at the time. So we bought them out and we became an independent agency. And then
here we are. That's where we are now. Yeah, I love it. And it all makes sense. And there's a really nice little flow to it, which is great. I love that part. Now, while we sort of slowly wrapping this up here, tell us a bit about, besides obviously that you are still in the player trading, but, maybe have a couple of names you guys are currently representing or anything interesting you're doing before I want to have sort of a final conversation about the Brazilian football market and, during COVID and also post. So, but let's just have a quick one on, what it is exactly outside of, I guess, the continuation of what we just talked about for the last hour, what you're doing at TFM. Is there anything else or, some names you want to throw out, which you're working on right now?
Well, Our business model is as an agency, we've really focused on the young players because we see them as the players who are going to go to the big clubs in Europe. And we started this right after, while we were still in the traffic group, but right after TPO was forbidden by FIFA. So we saw, okay, so we're not, as I had told you before, we weren't really representing a lot of players because we were too busy brokering deals. Right. You say, well, okay, now we're not going to have, we kept Estoril, which was a good platform. It wasn't TPO. It was, us running a club and buying and selling players for that club. So it wasn't just, you have to have the player play for you. You're not just looking at their potential. You have to think about the sporting side as well. Right. And we thought, okay, so now we have a lot of free, brain power to say, okay, let's figure out what are we going to do. And it was 2014, and we decided, okay, so if we want to have the next Neymars of Brazil, we have to sign them very young, because by the time these players are 17, 18 years old, they're gone. They already have their agents, and there's two ways, because it's a very fragmented market. You either team up with the player's agent if it's a smaller agent, or you can sign the player directly. So there's also a parallel market, kind of speak, in which the big agents are trying to lure the smaller agents to say, okay, if you have a great talent, team up with me, right? So you're competing with these small agents, but when these small agents get the player, then you have a second you have a second chance, which is try to bring the partner in. And we were very lucky, because when we started this in 2014, we were able to sign a young prospect in Vinicius Jr., who was the top player 2000 in Brazil. Now, when we say player 2000, it means that's the year of birth. So that's how you kind of know the generation of the player. It's like, when you think in American sports, you say that player is a freshman or sophomore or senior, you kind of put them in classes. So he was the top 2000 player in Brazil. We signed him at a very young age. He was 14 years old at the time. And it kind of changed the history of our agency, because in 2017, he had not turned 17 yet. He was still 16. Real Madrid came and made a bid for him. And Barcelona was also interested. And that was, obviously the greatest deal of my life, because it ended up being the biggest transfer in the history of Brazilian football. And it was for a player 16 years old who had never played one professional game for the first team of Flamengo.
Sorry, what is his name? I'm not sure if I caught that. Or
Vinicius Jr.
Right. Okay, Junior. Right. Got it. Yeah. So now
Vini Jr. Now we've rebranded him in Real Madrid, Vini Jr. So he's been playing for Real Madrid now for 3 years. He's I think the third youngest player to play 100 games for Real Madrid. So he's becoming, he's flourishing. He's having a great career. He's, an extremely charismatic character. He has a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers. His Instagram has over 12 million. I mean, he's unbelievable. He's played for the Brazil national team, and he's only 20 years old.
Yeah, I love it.
So
bright future ahead there. Where does he plays what position?
He's a left wing. So he was supposed to come in as the understudy of Cristiano Ronaldo.
Okay.
And then what happened was, the summer that he arrived, Real Madrid sold Cristiano to Juventus for other reasons, not because he was arriving.
Sure.
And then the next season, Real Madrid signed Eden Hazard from Chelsea.
Right. Yeah.
So he is the backup of Eden Hazard for Real Madrid. Now, the problem is Hazard has been injured for such a long time that he's been having a lot of minutes and a lot of games, and it's been a great story.
Good for him. Yeah. Awesome. I mean, like I said, we could go on forever here, but I'm a little bit conscious also of our time here, and I don't want to keep it that long here. But now, if you look at football, and I think we already discussed it enough now that how much talent is coming out of Brazil, and to me, it's a typical example of a country where you still have a reasonable poor part of the country, or poor neighborhoods there, and these kids, that's their way out, right? That is they know, they've seen it. There are enough role models out there to see that if I play good football, or if I have some talent, or if I work hard enough, there is a way out, and I can make a living, and my family and everything else with it comes up. That's the easy part to see, and it's for sure a no-brainer. At the same time, of course, local football has constantly challenges, as you already alluded to earlier, right? The clubs are constantly in trouble. The best players are always being sold, and even though the potential is there, it's a big country, right? It's not, Brazil is a small place, but it has never really taken off. Now you add COVID on top of it, and we got this. Yeah. I'm assuming, again, only watching what I read, of course, in the papers, and Brazil was obviously very hard hit by COVID. With many deaths and a big mess there, and I'm sure it had a huge impact on the football industry on God knows how many levels, right? So just spend a little bit of time on what has been happening. Let's call it the last 12 months in Brazilian sports / football, before I want to go into where the opportunities are for private equity or investors to maybe come in now, where clearly, again, there will be plenty of distressed assets, right?
Yeah, I'm very skeptical about, Brazilian football as an industry. Obviously, I'm very bullish on the players because of the culture of the country, and because of, it's
in the blood.
It's in the blood, yes. And they're playing on the streets, since they're 3 years old. So obviously the great players will come out of here. Now, It is, in terms of when you think about the structure of the football, there is one problem, which is one. South America is, I think, in my view, and having lived in the United States and traveling all over the world, it's a very isolated place, Marcus. I mean, if you think about it, if you're going to fly to South America, it's a pain for everyone to fly over, right? And I'm talking everywhere. It's not from Europe, from America, and it's a very poor region. So it's not only Brazil has been struggling and has had its ups and downs, but the region as a whole is poor, right? And that makes it and the thinking of the people is they're not very innovative. I used to joke, if Bill Gates were Brazilian, there would be no Microsoft. It's a difficult place to be in, and the football industry in special. It has one problem, which is these are social clubs. Right. So these are not well-managed companies. Now, it's much better now than 20 years ago, because now you have professionals running the clubs. But still, the political overview of these professionals makes it sometimes that even if these guys are professionals, they only keep their job if they keep the political people happy in the clubs. And they only keep the political people happy in the clubs if the fans, and these guys are worried about the fans and the media and the club members. So when I say political, it's not in terms of government. It's because each of these clubs, they have their internal politics. So they're elected members, right? So it's a little bit, when you think about it, it's a little bit like the history of sports business, right? You have all these federations in Europe, and you have all these sports marketing firms buying these rights from the federations, right? And you have to think about it. Okay, why don't these federations, why don't they develop the rights? Well, it's because it's not their job to develop. They're worried about the sport, right? So it's the same here. I mean, they're not worried. When you go talk to the Liverpool CEO, he talks about Fortnite being a competitor of Liverpool.
Yes.
When you go speak with the president of a club in Brazil, they're thinking about the swimming pool that they have to do over. They're thinking about the painting the walls of the club. Wow. And they give the day-to-day management of the football operations to professionals, but then again, they're lacking a macro overview of where the business is going and what they should do. Because then in turn, what these guys are worried about is the sporting result. Because that's what the elected directors of the club are worried about, because they want to keep their members happy. And how do they keep their members happy? If the club is in good shape for people to go play tennis in the weekend, and if the team is having, good results. So if you think about it, it's messed up from the top. I mean, how can this be successful? If you just the drivers are wrong, they're not thinking.
Sorry, are most of these clubs also involved in other sports? So it's not just a football club. So they have
Well, and that's the thing.
or how does that? Yeah, is that the
I
structure
mean,
normally?
in Brazil, football is the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sports. So,
Correct.
they might have other sports, but they're not really relevant. I mean, there is interest in the Olympics. Think about the Brazilian volleyball team, but they're not. You don't have. Like Flamengo has a big. Like they have the basketball team's really good. I think they were winners, or they compete very well for the South American Championship. But it's not. These are clubs who are focused in football. This is the big thing. This is the main thing. And what happens many times is the football is profitable, but then they have to pay for the management of the social club, and then they lose money. And it's become and these elected directors, they're in for 2 or 3 year terms. So they have no interest in long-term strategy. No interest at all. The one club who had one administration and changed that was Flamengo, because Flamengo, after many years of, suffering with, being the biggest club in Brazil, probably the biggest club in South America, and they had a huge economic problems, and they were able to elect one president who said, look, for the next 3 to 6 years, it was a 3-year term, so he had to be reelected to have the full 6, I will sacrifice the sporting results to make the club right for the future. And, it's the club that's been dominating Brazilian football for the last 2 years, which is right after he left. Right. And it's funny because I see a lot of, and the new president was also part of this group that elected the first president. But, a lot of, fans and even people in the business say, well, this president is much better than the one before. They say, well, but this president can only do what he's doing because the one before was, cleaned up the club. Correct. So it was one club who did it, but I don't know. And it's, many times it's mentioned by other clubs when there are presidential elections, and they say, well, we have to go through the process of Flamengo. That's going to be the benchmark, blah, 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 blah. But then when they're elected, it doesn't happen, because then the day-to-day, problems and short-term solutions are apparently what they focus on. So it's a very difficult world. And what you see now, Red Bull bought a club in Brazil, and they're already in first division, and they were very successful last season, and I'm very bullish on them. Right, okay. There was a smaller club who is also a company that was promoted this year, but it's very difficult, because you can never know what's going to happen, and they don't see. And there's this whole idea, right, that if you brought back all the Brazilian players who play abroad, if you bring them back to Brazil, we would have the best league in the world, right? If course. Neymar was playing here, hypothetically. But the problem is, if they were playing here, they would not be the brands that they are, because they are only the brands that they are because they play for Real Madrid and Barcelona and Paris Saint-Germain and Manchester United. So it's a bit of
the logic makes
flawed.
No sense.
It's a flawed logic, in my view. So.
I think it would make no sense either, because the money isn't in the market either, right? The players couldn't never make the same amount of money, and clearly, exactly. If you trickle it all down, the economic impact still of the players, even if he plays overseas, a lot of money would, I'm sure, land in Brazil with family and investments or things he does there. So that is absolutely. I think that makes no sense thinking that way. Now, keeping the Brazil never lacks talent, that's for sure, right? And therefore, in theory, you should have plenty of talent there. At the same time, you got to accept the fact the best basketball players will land in the NBA, right? No matter how great of a club they may be playing in Europe or wherever part of the world, they will go to the NBA, and so you got to accept the fact when it comes to football is they will. And you
still have a good EuroLeague, right, for basketball. So that's exactly. that's what they should focus on. What I think the view here is, they're trying to go against the system, in which they should actually embrace the system. They should actually say, okay, so this is the way the money's flowing. This is how I can finance myself. Okay, let me sell the young talent and let me focus on the older talent, because obviously it's people are passionate about football in Brazil. It's all they talk about. They don't really care. There's a certain point in which you say, okay, Paris Saint-Germain eliminated Barcelona last night. People don't care about that. They're thinking about what's happening here. right? In the
Yeah,
day-to-day.
local football is always going to be the first topic.
Exactly. So that's key. And I think they're too worried about the perception outside of Brazil. So, a lot of times they say, oh, we have to globalize the brand. We have to think about the TV distribution. And my view is just get your stuff straight here before you try to move outside, because you're losing so much potential here. I mean, you go on the weekends and I see my son and his friends, and they're all wearing jerseys of international clubs.
Yeah, of course.
And they're playing Fortnite, and they're doing other activities. So they should worry about the Brazilian market. Think about Brazil. Think about how you do the best entertainment possible here. Draw up a 10, 20-year plan. Let's help each other. The club should sit down on the table, and they should, and they're not. They're actually trying to, beat someone else. So Flamengo now, what they're doing is, because they're so successful, they want to step on everyone's head. They lobby to change the law of TV rights, because they just want to be, they want to become kind of the Bayern Munich. They're not interested in setting up the NBA. They want to be the Bayern Munich of Brazil. So they want to win 8 out of 10. But that's because the president was elected by members. And these members, they don't want the NBA. They want Flamengo to be the biggest club in Brazil, bar none. So
very selfish. And even Bayern Munich, if you think of it, as successful as they are, and you could argue in some cases using that leverage, they still sharing the pie in Germany actually fairly equally, right? I mean, it's not like they make so much more money than the others on the local light. They make more money because of who they are as a club. And you could argue by many times players of the other teams, but it's so there are exactly. I think there are ways to balance that, and of course the UK has done a pretty good job, and even you think of Spain, who we've always had the 2 big clubs there, but you do have others who nibble on their heels on a regular basis, and that is what football needs. So now, look, this has been a great and very colorful conversation here. Everything from how you started to, of course. Your almost 15 years there was traffic, and now being back on your own and doing things what you love doing, being that Jerry Maguire of Brazilian football, which is it's a compliment to you here.
Thank you.
And and everything else which we touched on. So Fred, this was fun. We could talk forever here because it's such a fascinating market. It's such a fascinating industry, and the player trading and the talent coming out of Brazil is just never ending. So hopefully we'll have a chance to talk some more soon here. But I think for today, we'll stop right here. And thank you for your time there, and have a great day in Sao Paulo.
Thank you. Thank you. We love it. That's why we do it, right? So
exactly.
Thank you, and let's keep in touch, Marcus.
Definitely. Thanks, buddy. Talk soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.